I think Tim Titrud is going to kick it off.
Okay, so my talk is on the Matthew Shepard killing by Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, and it happened in October 1998. Now, was that a false flag event? It's not maybe your classic false flag event. It was, and I'll try to give evidence to the official story and what happened, and maybe the alternative story. So, in a sense, it's not your classic false flag where somebody pre-planned the whole event. But what I see is that an event happened, and then they used that and changed it around and blamed somebody else, or changed the character of the people that were involved in it for their own ends. So, of course, the killing occurred, and then what was the end result? And I think that's how you can look at the evidence if it's a false flag or not, is what was the end result? And was, the people that the elite, they often have a motivation. And so I see that the end result was the Matthew Shepard hate crime bill. And the official story is Matthew Shepard and James Spear Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act. So that was after more than a decade of advocacy by the Human Rights Campaign, the Matthew Shepard and James Spear Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was signed into law by President Barack Obama in October 28, 2009. So, and the people that are advocates for the hate crime bill, this is how they define the hate crime. The hate crime occurs when a perpetrator of a crime intentionally selects the victims because of who the victim is. Hate crimes rend the fabric of society and fragment communities because they target an entire community or group of people, not just the individual victim. And so what does the hate crime do? Hate crime bill do? It gives the Department of Justice the power to investigate and prosecute bias-motivated violence by providing the DOJ with jurisdiction over crimes of violence where a perpetrator has selected a victim because of the person's actual perceived race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So in addition, it provides the DOJ with the ability to aid state and local jurisdictions with investigations and persecution of bias-motivated crimes of violence. So, what are the results? How does it? What does this hate crime bill do? And I see that it can control speech. During the debates that they had in Congress, Senator Jim DeMint asked, "Can priests, pastors, rabbis be sure their preaching will not be persecuted if they say certain things are right or wrong?" So if they say that homosexuality is wrong, maybe that could be something that could be used against them, and then they could be charged under this bill. So it controls our freedom of speech, and this is what America First Amendment is: freedom of speech. And also, it gives. So today we're talking about power, police powers, and it gives the police a lot of power. Also, it gives them the power because how can it be determined if a crime is done against a homosexual or not? What's the motivation? Was it just because you robbed a 7-Eleven for a few bucks, or you robbed that 7-Eleven and your motivation was to rob that 7-Eleven because it was owned by a homosexual? So nobody knows what's in the mind of a man, so that's a scary thing where they can do that. The police have that extra power, or the authorities, the elite. So the police and government do an interpretation, and this brings a great amount of power to the police state. And also it centralizes the power. Instead of these law, it's a federal law instead of a county or state or city law. It's now it's more centralized power. So I see there was the motivation to change, to give evidence of a false flag. Now the official story, any story is pretty complicated, but also there was a simplification of the story. It's much more complex than what we've been told. It's emblematic stories need emblematic victims. So Matthew Shepard, they created a myth after him. which is part of it. History is malleable. So he became this Christ-like figure. So his passion, death, and resurrection is very much Christ-like. Even the way he died, it made it seem like his arms were stretched out like Christ. But in reality, did that happen? He was not crucified. His hands were not outstretched, as has been suggested by all manners of media since 1998. The 21-year-old University of Wyoming student was discovered near death, but rather tied behind him as in handcuffs, latched to a pole 4 inches off the ground, his head propped up on the lowest fence rail, his leg extending out to the east. He was lying almost flat on the back, but they're told a story that he was like this Christ-like figure, how he's crucified. And also, one other thing I think that you can give evidence that this was kind of a false flag event is the Westboro Baptist Church was involved. Often, anytime an event happens and like this, and they want to create this false flag event, the elite will bring in the Westboro Church. It's a small little church, and where do they get their funding? A lot of money. So they are right there at the very beginning.
Where is it?
It's in Topeka, Kansas. And so they were there really quick, from Kansas to Wyoming. It's a drive, but you see them all over the nation. So they were right there at Shepard's funeral on the 17th of October, 1998, with flags saying, "God hates fags." So then your attention is onto, demonize. You're going to demonize the Westboro. Everybody's saying, "Oh, this is just ridiculous. This is terrible," and you put your attention to there rather than looking at what's really going on. So the other evidence of Westboro, they were also at the Virginia Tech with their protest at that shooting, which clearly is a false flag. Other ones, like 3407, and when there are any U.S. troops, which isn't really a false flag, but U.S. troops are buried. They're there protesting, and the Binghamton massacre, they're also there. They've also been found that they get money from Soros, so it's very interesting. Okay, so now the official story. So McKinney and Henderson, in the official story, they pretended to be gay in order to gain Shepard's trust to rob him. So they met him at the Fireside Lounge, and they selected Shepard after he arrived. And then McKinney asked Shepard, alleged McKinney said that Shepard asked for a ride home. And after they befriended him, they took him to a remote area outside of Laramie, where they robbed him and assaulted him severely and tied him to a fence. And then took rope from McKinney's truck while Shepard pleaded for his life. And media reports often contain the graphic accounts of pistol whipping. They did purchase by a drug trade a large pistol, and they fractured his skull. And Henderson pleaded guilty on April 5th, and testified against McKinney. McKinney was the one that was more involved in the beating than Henderson. Henderson actually tried to prevent McKinney from doing much of the beating. And then Henderson and McKinney they're incarcerated in the Wyoming State Penitentiary, and they have life for life. Okay. Now, 2020 did a special a report on this about 4 or 5 years ago. And they went to Wyoming and did some research. And they found that Matthew Shepard and McKinney actually knew each other. And they both went to parties together. And often Shepard and McKinney, they both took a lot of drugs, and meth was one of the main drugs they took. So 2020, they made it more look like that money and drugs was the motivation. So and also that McKinney, they were both high on drugs. They were for like 4 or 5 days, totally stoned on meth. And so their motivation was they first wanted to go and rob from another local drug dealer, and that didn't work out. And then then they went to the bar and they found Shepard, And then, let's see one second. Okay, so Laramie has a lot of meth. And so that's kind of the scene that's there in Wyoming. So the night of the crime, so in a sense that, so in the story, it seems like it's more that McKinney and Henderson, their motivation was not because he was homosexual. Their motivation was purely on money and drugs, and they weren't thinking clearly because they're high for so long. And also the evidence that it wasn't just motivated because of the homosexuality of Shepard is because after they tied him up, they clearly did the crime of beating him, tying him to the post. They went back into town and they were going to rob Shepard's home, his apartment. But then when they were coming into town, they saw that there was a couple young men vandalizing some vehicles, slashing their tires. And so they got involved in a fight with those men at that time. And so the police got involved and they chased and so because of their high on meth and so on, they were involved in that fight. And then so that's how the police were able to discover that there was a pistol in the truck and filled with blood, had blood on it, and they further investigated it and found, did a lot of investigation and found that, yeah, the crime was committed by these two. So, now, also, was the motivation, one other thing, the homosexuality of Shepard. McKinney was also, from the research, people they would talk to, they found that McKinney was a bisexual man, that he did have three-way sex with a couple different people, and the people they talked to said, yeah, they were part of it. So now in the official story, they don't bring in that McKinney is a bisexual. They make it out to like he's more of this, these two men are just these rednecks out to just kill somebody who's homosexual. So they leave out a lot of part of the evidence of the crime. So I think anytime we hear these official stories, we should check out more of the evidence of what really happened. What are the end results? Is the end result of more of a police state? Is it more laws that are put in to reduce our freedom of speech and so on? And then we should do more detailed look, especially in those cases. And this is one of them, I think, that you investigate and it doesn't really, the official story doesn't really cut it, I don't see. So, that's my question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're basically saying that the incident was used to kind of create this hate crime law and kind of imply that there's a lot of anti-homosexual violence out there, when in fact it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and when you say this hate crime, they use that story for
Right.
motivation. That's just one aspect of it. I see. They use it, and who used it? The media used it, and who controls the media. Also, one thing too is that it started out not just like this plot by the elite or the government or the media to do this story. Initially, a couple days before the murder, the killing, Matthew Shepard did belong to a gay group in his college, University of Wyoming. And one of the gentlemen there was saying that he was somebody tried to beat him up because he was gay at the college. And he said, in the group, everybody we have to watch what's going on because there's this, hatred towards us. And so I think the people in this club are already in that mindset that, oh yeah, we're going to be a victim. And then, so Matthew Shepard did become a victim, but it was more a chance, I feel, than anything else. Just happened. And so then the members of this gay
come to my front door, getting me to sign this petition or something to kind of create hate crimes.
Right.
You know, get this legal definition kind of, I mean, I don't know, I mean, at the time I said, well, you know, they can prosecute. I've asked for kind of clarification without too much success, but it seemed like the gay people themselves are out there kind of pushing this idea of hate crime.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you will have that with also other groups, certain races and so on, we'll say, of course, earlier, in the 60s, you had the black community saying we need this hate crime laws and so on to motivate. I mean, when you first hear it, it sounds good, right? But you dig deeper, what is the end result? So there is motivation by certain groups to say they want, by many of them, that they want these rules.
I think it's interesting that the media chose homosexual issue because they could have chosen, if they wanted to pass hate crime laws, they could have chosen black as a victim or any number of other individuals to make their celebrity cause. But they chose homosexual to do this, to get the hate crimes passed. And I'm curious as to why they would choose homosexual issue to, be the issue to get hate crimes passed.
Right, because they could choose a Mormon, say Mormons are persecuted, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, which they are often. Why homosexuality? I think you can look into what the Frankfurt School and what they were promoting was to break up the family. And one way is to promote homosexuality.
Franklin or
Frankfurt School.
No.
And so that could be, I don't know.
Also, could you say it's a hot button issue, kind of like abortion? It's like you're always going to get disagreement on something like that. And it's just a way to rile people up, I would think.
I'm confused. What is it? I don't know anything about Frankfurt School trying to break up the family, but what does it have to do with?
Well, I mean, why homosexuality over Jehovah's Witnesses or over, Catholics or, the Frankfurt School, their philosophy was you have to destroy society in order to rebuild it. And one part is to destroy the family. And so their view is they were saying, well, we have to promote homosexuality and that will help destroy the family and then we can rebuild the society as we want. So it's a theory that's there. I don't know.
And what is the Frankfurt School?
It started in Germany.
What time period?
In the
Frankfurt Oder or Frankfurt am Main?
it's like in the I think 30s, 40s, and they came to the United States, and they came into a lot of the universities, a lot of professors, right?
Sorry. So you see this hate crime things as a part of a project to promote homosexuality?
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah, with the
Maybe
whole
add
can work.
something. I think that the hate crime laws, one of the alternate arguments or from the other side is that there's plenty of laws. You kill somebody, there's plenty of laws. There's capital punishment laws. You kill somebody, you go to jail for the rest of your life in that kind of society. But the hate crime laws are really geared to protecting certain classes of people, like protecting the criticism of Israel, say, by saying that it's a hate crime and calling it anti-Semitism instead of the direct assault on a nasty state. Or any other kind of patriotism, say, even America, you're anti-American, So I think that the hate crime laws are very, very broad, and they target groups along the way, like he said, blacks and homosexuals, and in Israel as a state. And so I kind of look at it as a broad issue, but this is one aspect.
Could say
one
the
group.
Patriot Act is the ultimate hate crime law.
I'm sorry.
The Patriot Act is the ultimate hate crime law. It covers everything.
Yeah.
They can do anything they want to.
Yeah.
I guess I'd just say I think that's all very debatable. I'm thoroughly unconvinced, as of yet at least, that hate crime legislation is strictly motivated for control. I think there are probably, it seems to me, there are probably some fairly strong arguments for such legislation to reduce terrorizing violence against smaller, victimized populations, gays, blacks. I mean, there are historical precedents where these populations have been terrorized, and to say, hey, when you terrorize this population by acts of violence, you know, you're perpetrating this societal terror, you know, exactly what the laws say they're about. I think that's a very strong argument, actually. I mean, it might be both, that both things are true. There's motivations, as you described. I don't know anything about the promotion of I'm not referring to that it's about promoting homosexuality, but about state control. There may be motivations for that, but I think there's also strong arguments that may be very well meant and very strong and good at protecting these classes from.
I agree, because it does sound good, and part of it is you have to pass a law, you have to get the people to buy into it. So that's one way. It has some good points to it, right? But in the end, they're going to use that.
I don't know. I'd have to study it a lot more. I'm not willing to take your assertion that it's strictly a control move.
If I were a gypsy or Jewish or homosexual or flat earther or whatever, I would want to protect it.
Yeah, and so the thing is, why they don't, in the laws, there's no protection. The hate crime bill is not for just gypsies.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
and Nazis persecuted all kinds of minorities.
Right.
And gypsies and Jews.
Right. But they specify specific ones, right? And we already, like Cathie said, we already have laws against these things, right? So if I'm killed, if I'm murdered, right? Or did they murder? So the police have this power. They can say, well, I was murdered because I was bald, right? Well, and I think people that are bald are being persecuted, and then they can go after that person much harsher. So they have this power then to have, rather than just go after them for murder, then they have to add something else. And so we already have laws. We don't need to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Time
to.
We won't let you, don't worry.
Right.
Hi, my name's Richard, and if you know me, you're going to hear things because I'm often accused of repeating a lot of things. But
You said that again?
huh? I belong to the Department of Redundancy Department. Anyway, we had someone who visited us, our group, our little group, the oldest 9/11 group in the city, and Mike Gallo, ex-senator of Alaska. And we had a meeting with him. He wanted to promote, it's a long deal, he wanted to promote getting some legislation passed. So I was talking to Mike about the JFK assassination. Obviously a military state operation. And Mike said, oh, I think the mafia might have been involved. You know, I got a little problem with that, Mike. And they were involved, they were part of the crew, not the planners.
Subcontractors.
And so Kennedy shot on a Friday, 11/22/63. By the very next Monday, Johnson had reversed Kennedy's Southeast Asian policy, and a 10-year war ensued with millions of Southeast Asians dead and at least 50,000 Americans. By then, Kennedy barely in his grave. So Johnson convened a panel, and this Jim Fetzer said Johnson probably was well aware of what was going to happen that day. Coincidentally, Richard Nixon was in Dallas that whole week prior to the Kennedy assassination. And Nixon, we can document at least 3 different stories that he told where he was on the day of 11/22/63. So Nixon, at least, I think, was briefed of what was going to happen. Nixon lost to Kennedy by apparently a flip of the vote in Chicago and Illinois because of Mayor Daley. So the Warren Commission comes out, and it's 13 volumes, and I do know one person that actually read through that entire thing. His name's John Judge. He grew up his parents were civilian employees at the Pentagon. And if you read through the Warren Commission, 13 volumes, you start noticing that there's a whole lot of data that does not support the conclusion, which was a lone gunman. So they went up to Alan Dulles, who was the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, fired by President Kennedy, ends up on the Warren Commission. Very interesting. As with other people like John McCloy and Gerald Ford, who eventually became president after Nixon resigned. So they went up to Alan Dulles and they said, you know, if someone actually reads these, they'll come to the conclusion that they'll figure out the conclusion is false. And Alan Dulles famously said, we'll put them out anyway. Americans don't read. But you know, that's so true, and especially this day with the internet. How many people actually do read any longer? The one book, the best-selling 9/11 book by Webster Tarpley, called 9/11 Synthetic Terror, the 5th volume just came out, and I plan to get it. And why the 5th volume is so important is because it lists about 50 military drills on or before 9/11. People say the smoking gun. Yes, it's interesting to look at the buildings and a lot of the evidence. But we need to look at the continuity between one false flag and the other. And it's the military drills. And I'll go into detail if I have some time about that. But we can document now an unprecedented amount of drills on that day. Basically to send all the military away so they could not intercept. And I think a key one was at the National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia. And from what I heard is that the plan was, the drill was what would happen if a plane smashed into that building. It really isn't that tall of high-rise. National Reconnaissance Organization, they monitor all the satellites in this country. And I think, and I heard the drill, you won't read this in any books, but they sent the entire National Reconnaissance people outside of this drill, I think during the time when 9/11 was happening, so they could not monitor from the satellites what was happening. They're very shrewd of these people. Anyway, just a little insight about that. I need to follow up a few things that Fetzer spoke about, and what Tim was speaking about, gatekeeping. And why the gatekeepers will look at thermite and won't look at what I think is mini nukes or some kind of nuclear activity. And this is why, because Americans have no idea how much money we have spent on thermonuclear weapons or on the Pentagon at all. But since the end of World War II, I have figured we have spent at least $60 to $70 trillion on the Pentagon, at least that much, with about 1/3 going to thermonuclear weapons, which I figure about $20 to $25 trillion. Now, can you imagine if we have spent that much money on public health, public schools, public transportation? What kind of great country this would be? Now, this is what we have spent it on now. I think everyone recognizes this picture. That's your $20 trillion that we pay out of our pockets went to. Now, I'm not saying, I'm just contrasting that to pictures of 9/11. It's very, I can pass these around too. Almost looks like a problem there.
Very sophisticated weaponry.
Very sophisticated weaponry.
Sophisticated weaponry. Makes the case for Judy Wood as well, I think. At least.
Well, it makes the case of someone. So I think one of the reasons that the gatekeeper, let me pass these pictures around, is they don't want people to know that at least 1% of our budget every year goes to fund nuclear labs in Sandia, Los Alamos, and Livermore, and many other labs. And they employ tens of thousands of people with almost zero public input on these things. And these places are apparently, as the whistleblowers tell us, very toxic places. And why are we developing third, fourth, fifth generations of mini nukes? Well, this is why. So they can disintegrate a building. And I'll tell you who they are in a second. But I do want to give some quotes. Jim Fetzer said yesterday, this is the CIA Director, William Colby, the CIA owns everyone of significance in the major media. Worth thinking about. Here's William Casey, another CIA Director. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false.
Who said that again?
William Casey, another CIA director. Very.
Who did he say that to? And what-
It was from his first staff meeting in 1981. It's documented. It was William Bader.
What tone of voice did you use when you said it?
Huh? Okay.
It could, I mean, it's so over the top, it could be a joking remark.
I tell you
I'm not
what.
trying to I believe that that's their engagement, but so, you know, complete with everything is false. I mean, that sounds like a joke on the face of it.
I'm not too sure about
Why
that.
would you want them to believe everything they believe is false? I mean, you want them to believe that, you know, you want them probably to understand how to manufacture things so you can sell them around the world correctly. You probably want them to not all, you know, whatever. Everything's a bit total. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, in the 70s, and I have this article, if anybody wants to email me, it's science@zzz.com. It was called CIA and the Media by Carl Bernstein. It came out in Rolling Stone. And he quotes a former CIA intelligence officer, William Bader. There is quite an incredible spread of relationships. You do not need to manipulate Time Magazine, for example, because there are CIA people at the management level. Now, I can assure you that every major newspaper in this country, there's CIA management people. Here's Carl Bernstein again. The agency's relationship with the New York Times was by far its most valuable amongst newspapers. It was General Times policy to provide assistance to the CIA whenever possible. Now, this was back in the 70s. We can only assume it has expanded immensely. I'm going to read a couple other quotes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You started off with Mike Gravel mentioning his name, and could you, I'm not...
Well, I led that into the JFK assassination, the Warren Commission.
But he's promoting a new inquiry into the 9/11
Well, you know, I was curious because I think the two bookmarks of my generation is the JFK assassination in 1963, a military coup d'etat, and September 11, 2001, another military coup d'etat, a secret team, a rogue government. And those are two bookmarks. So I wanted to question Gravel about JFK. Now, Gravel has intelligence agency background. And as we saw yesterday, I mean, you don't have to really dig too deep to know that this was a very, 9/11 was a very involved operation. JFK was also a very involved
So
operation.
you're implying, and it seems to me that Mike Gravel is just a gatekeeper. Is that what you're assessing?
On this one issue, I was kind of taken aback at his response. I was really quite surprised by it. The President does not have power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation. You said that, Cathie. The President does not have the power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation. Well, Barack Obama said that December 20th, 2007. I think he's backed away from that.
Wow.
Well, as I often tell Cathie, how do we know Barack Obama's lying?
Because his mouth is moving.
Okay, we got a couple other quotes. This is from President Kennedy. The great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, continued, and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. How little did he know that would come to apply to his murder, his assassination. And one last quote, which has to do with critical thinking. He who takes a stand is often wrong, but he who fails to take a stand is always wrong. You know, which leads me to believe how few people, and I brought this up, just have an opinion on anything based on any kind of thinking, critical thinking or otherwise. And when I hear people give the most ridiculous statements, I ask, well, where did you get that bit of information? And I quit asking that because people can't give me an answer, which is probably a television. And pretty incredible. Anywho, speaking also about critical thinking, I want to talk about America's foreign policy objectives. And one of them that we all know is just for the multinationals, just to go in and steal resources. Iraq, here's just a whole big chunk of water, Libya, a whole big bunch of water, minerals. And also to set up and get cheap labor is another foreign policy objective. But one foreign policy objective no one really thinks about, and it's so critical too, is the ideological objective. I mean, why would America be so against countries like Cuba for so long? Obviously, Cuba doesn't have a lot of resources, and they don't. But it's that ideological is such a threat to the elite, to the multinationals. And I think it comes to what I consider the greatest cover-up, the greatest secret of them all is what I personally think, from what I have studied, is with the technological and engineering capacities of this planet, there's plenty enough to go around for everybody. Everybody could easily be housed, closed, educated, have access to the media, and transported. But that's not the model that the multinationals and the billionaires want. And that is such an incredible secret. There is no reason why we don't, in this country alone, we don't have bullet trains between every major city in this country. There's no question why we don't. And because this country is so reactionary, we are going to lose, and I think we're already losing, our innovative edge to China and other developing countries. And it's not going to bode well for this country. I mean, there's been an attack on the middle class, and I think it's going to get way worse. Anyway, continuing on, is another book called How the Military Invades. You know, I was thinking of Ace Hayes used to have these great seminars, and he would just have stacks and stacks of books. I'd sure love to do that again and just bring about 50 books, because books have so much knowledge and they provoke so much thought. But this one is also very good by Mick Turst, How the Military Invades Our Everyday Lives. We talk about the, who was it, Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. But what it really is, and this is what Turst writes, it's the military, industrial, technological, entertainment, scientific, media, intelligence, corporate complex. Because the media, the Pentagon, the military has invaded so many aspects of our lives, and it's so seamless too. I mean, how many movies do we see about real covert operations, any of the false flags that we can give you? Very few, if any. It may be one by Oliver Stone called JFK, which, by the way, was the only movie ever in Time Magazine's history to be reviewed before the movie came out. That's how scared they were about that movie. It's still a really good movie.
And they attacked the Garrison characters not being quite accurate. They used that literary device to tell the story.
Right, well, that movie mixed
But it was accurate.
some fiction and nonfiction, but the stuff it had in it that was so true, it was so well done.
Yeah.
And it scared them. They don't really like to be exposed.
Richard, 5 minutes.
Okay. They haven't really, okay. Anyway, one word I don't like to use is the word government, because that's another word that has been misplaced, especially when it comes to false flags. Covert operations, because we're talking about a rogue network, an invisible government, secret government, parallel government, or as Peter Dale Scott wrote, deep state. And this is how we should refer to these people, because these groups are not responsible to anybody except themselves. I guess I could go on and on.
If you're wrapping up, that's okay.
Which I usually do.
We just to give a logistical statement, Zara is running a little late, but she is on her way. So, right, so,
Working out, all right.
yeah, it's working out. Crystal's here, we're setting up a table outside, so that's where we'll be. No, outside.
Is there a break time or all that? It was just like that.
Is there?
Break times in the middle of the day or? I don't know.
I have to do
Oh, well, lunch is theoretically from noon to 1, and then,
Okay.
yeah.
It's
So,
gonna be late.
okay.
Both of you.
All right, I'm going to cover the July 22nd bombs that exploded in the capital city of Norway, Oslo. It was followed by a shooting incident on an island where a youth meeting of the Labour Party was being held. Now, you know, anytime anything like this happens, my radar goes up. And I wonder, how can we really determine whether this was a false flag operation or if it's really true that this is just some psychopath running around setting off bombs and killing people, like the media really is trying to train our minds to believe. Well, I kind of looked at other false flag operations, and especially the 9/11 terrorist attack. We're using that word, terrorist. You know, so much study was done that we can start to see something. Something starts to come into view. And what starts to come into view is a definite blueprint of a false flag operation. And I've identified a couple of parts. And one is the pre-programming or predictive programming that goes on. And I'll go into a lot of this in more detail. So I'm just going to do a general summary of some of the points that I see are fingerprints. The story constantly changes. There's one story that comes out, and then when that becomes revealed that there's a problem with that, there's another story and another story and another story. The usual story by the mainstream media is just rife with incorrect information and disinformation and some truth, just to keep your mind boggled with the situation. Another blueprint or another fingerprint I recognize is the inconceivability of the event. Buildings went down like they did. Just the inconceivability of the event. Another one, certainly we're all kind of familiar with, in my lifetime, it was Oswald, the lone gunman, that has morphed into the mastermind that now has a cadre, like a following, of Muslim terrorists. Another blueprint is the police or military stand-down. Cheney's bunker with the plane coming in. Another, the agenda is often revealed, not only in Hollywood by predictive programming, but the agenda is often revealed in some kind of manifesto. And it certainly is revealed after the event. You can say, now that we can see what has happened with the police state, with laws that have been enacted, et cetera, we can see why 9/11 happened. Another one is that the terrorist is known immediately. This is just almost inconceivable. Maybe it's one of those inconceivable facts. Another is that military exercises, military police exercises, the drills that go on. And another one is, what is the geopolitical advantage for an event happening in some particular place? And certainly, what is the financial gain? So just like 9/11, as different parts of the story reveal itself, it becomes apparent that the official story, the Oslo bombing, just really doesn't make any sense. Starting especially with the lone gunman scenario. Let's start with several eyewitnesses on the island. It happened on Utoya. It was an island of Utoya where the only access to this island was via helicopter or ferry. And they had multiple ferries and little boats that took people back and forth all the time. So several witnesses on the island of Utoya, the survivors, identified more than one shooter. So I think this is really significant. This was persistent. It wasn't just one witness. It was multiple witnesses said no, it wasn't just this Breivik. It was there was at least one other gunman identified, the color of the hair, what he looked like, etc. And you want to know what? Even if there was only Breivik himself, it is highly improbable that this guy was able to murder, I think it was 92 people all by himself. If he did accomplish this feat alone, which is highly, highly, highly improbable, he must be a highly trained assassin, which, according to the newspapers, he was a hunter, but he was not a highly trained assassin. This required tremendous marksmanship and tremendous precision. So a good question would be, is Breivik a product of a CIA or other intelligence program, mind control program? Is he a true marksman? Is he a trained assassin? Was the other person involved a trained assassin? Obviously something else is going on in this scenario. Now, an interesting fact is that Breivik has shown up in court. And one of the incidents in court that got revealed through mainstream, through alternative media anyway, is that when Breivik was talking about his experience on the island, he was about to reveal that there was his accomplices or another accomplice, at which time the judge silenced Garrison and he was taken into solitary confinement once again. So, you know, we have some real indicators that this is looking a little suspicious. So another troubling aspect of the story is that it took the police 90 minutes to get to the island where the massacre was taking place. This is pretty unheard of. So part of the story even gets more ridiculous. That the helicopter that is usually, you know, waiting on standby by the police was not working. It wasn't ready. That's the excuse they said. The military helicopter was not on standby, which meant that the police then had to get into a car and travel for 20 minutes to get to the ferry. When they got on the boat began to sink. I am not kidding you. The boat began to sink. So this is a whole fiasco, and it certainly reminds us of some of the things about 9/11. You know, and when you look at it, like I think the big words that come to mind are incompetence. Another thing that comes to mind is just the considerable bumper. You know, when you take a look at NORAD and the incompetence there, the Patriot Act actually deals with some of this and how to bridge different intelligence aspects together, like the FBI, the CIA, the local police department. How to bridge these so that this incompetence doesn't continue to happen. In reality, it doesn't seem like it's incompetence to me. In reality, it seems like it's under the cover of incompetence that these things are taking place in order to implement more restrictive legislation and further surveillance. So, yeah. So there's another aspect that's really kind of troubling about this, you know, after the sinking boat. You know, they finally did get there. And as soon as they got there, here is an armed gunman. And the police didn't shoot Breivik. He was armed, he had full ammunition, he was not shot. The police simply said, "You're under arrest." He says, "Okay, I give up. And they called him by name. They knew who he was. Now, if you remember 9/11, shortly after 9/11, this was one of the things for me. I was in New York. I was actually upstate New York, and I remember almost right away that the name of Osama bin Laden was flashed across the screen almost immediately, like they knew who did it. Not only that, but they knew who the 19 hijackers were right away. You know, and all these pictures of these Muslim extremists were placed on the screen. So you had immediately, there was no trial, there was no investigation, there was no anything, there was no even time to think about who could possibly do this. And they knew the 19 hijackers like they knew who Breivik was. So to me, that's like terribly disturbing. And it points to that this was a state-sponsored operation and not some lone gunman out there shooting people and placing bombs. So a blueprint for a false flag operation is the consistency of holding drills or military exercises either simultaneously with the actual terror event. And we see that in London. If you remember the July 7/7 bombings in London, you saw that Peter Power was on the air and said, "Oh my God, the back of the hair," or something versus, this is not a direct quote, "the hair on the back of my head absolutely stood up. I couldn't believe what was happening. We were monitoring, we were running drills, in the same subway scenario, and even the bus station was the same. And then we had to go live. So they were running these drills, and all of a sudden, these guys with backpacks blew up subways and bus stations, and they had to go live. It's just really, really, really terribly disturbing. You'll find the same scenario going on in the Oslo bombings. Just in 2010, they had major military exercises going on in the precise buildings that the bombings took place in Oslo. So if you remember, the bombings took place first, and then this lone gunman was able to board a ferry dressed as a police officer, go over to an island, and start shooting people. So the military exercise was in the same buildings as the Oslo bombings actually happened. So that's pretty disturbing. Other aspects indicating reality is very different than the media portrays in this Oslo case. And typical false flags is a forewarning or a pre-programming of the event. You know, often Hollywood presents a similar scenario. Now, like the lone gunman, the first episode. Does anybody remember the lone gunman?
Pilot episode.
The pilot episode. Now, the lone gunman were these three dudes in the X-Files. And they were always like the geeks, you know, the ones that could break the matrix and break the code. Well, they spun off into their own series, which was really a flop, except for the first episode. The first episode showed planes going into attempting to go into the World Trade Center. The attack was thwarted by the lone gunman. But interestingly, Dan Hennig, whatever his name is,
Dean Henlon.
Dean Henlon, he was asked about this, and he says, well, very often the CIA drops off scripts.
Dean Henlon will be speaking tomorrow night at the Big Lounge in downtown. He just said
This is the writer.
He's one of the three actors of the Lone Gunman.
What's his name?
Dean Heglund, Heglund. He's going to be speaking at the Big Lounge.
What time?
Where is
At
it?
7 o'clock. It's
Where's the
about
location?
5th and Southwest.
So can I just say that we'll make an announcement about Clyde's event after. I just want to stay within our time frame and go on with this. So, you know, there are other examples of this, and I'm sure you've seen them. The Nicolas Cage movie, I forget it, but the BP oil explosion was there in his movie. It seems to be like it's always in front of us. And more directly related to the Oslo event, just prior to this awful scenario, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security produced a video suggesting that potential terrorists are not necessarily Muslims anymore. Now they are white or Caucasian males. Now I just find this terribly coincidental, you know, and I think that it falls under the same kind of blueprint or same kind of scenario, same kind of thought that this is a kind of programming or a predictive program you're getting used to, or they're preparing you for the idea that now white men are as much of a problem as the Muslims. A few other indications that this story is a media-controlled operation, and this can be seen in so many other operations of the past that have been revealed as false flag operations. The story changes. Yes?
Do you think that the prosecution, that they're also getting us used to the prosecution against Muslims versus whites, like here in Portland and in the Seattle or Spokane Martin Luther King parade, that guy wasn't prosecuted as much as any of the lone, like that was a hate crime, but they're not getting prosecuted as much as the Muslims.
You know, I think at this particular point, especially with, her name, Harmon, that, you know, like everybody is becoming the enemy, Crystal. It started out as the Muslims and whether they're prosecuted more or less, but it started out as the Muslims.
It just seems they want us to get used to the idea of Muslims being prosecuted more.
Well, the Muslims are prosecuted more, but now there's that shift. It's just like you'll start seeing a shift. Now the terrorists are people who question 9/11. The terrorists are, and this is actually in a Homeland Security brochure, the terrorists are people who carry the Constitution on them. The terrorists, yes, the terrorists are people who sport Ron Paul bumper stickers. Okay, the terrorists are conspiracy theorists. And the way that I believe that they're introducing this, like, you know, so everybody believes now that, that all Muslims are terrorists, and now that they can start introducing another level of homegrown terrorism, and that is the white male, and then the 9/11 conspiracies. So I think that we're just going to see a mushrooming of this thing. So I want to say, like one of the things about the Oslo story that certainly matches a blueprint scenario is the story always changes. And we'll go back to this Muslim thing. Initially, it came out that the mainstream media, I believe it was the BBC, said that the Muslim Brotherhood jihadist group, which nobody knows what that is, but the Muslim Brotherhood jihadist group took credit for the bombing, and they did so because of the cartoons that were actually produced by Denmark. Remember the silly the cartoons, you know? It just is, it's ridiculous on its face.
Produced by who?
Remember the Denmark cartoons that came out? Yeah. So, I think that at this particular point too, the media event of the lone gunman, this one guy as a psychopath, this one guy as a conservative. No, he's not a conservative. Here we go back to the story changing again. He's a anti-fascist. No, he's a fascist. So there's this constant, the constant shifting and constant placing of looking at him as opposed to looking at any of the wider scenario, even the victims of this crime.
It's kind of framing, huh?
It's kind of, yes,
Yeah.
very good word, yeah, excellent. So you have to consider, so those are a lot of the telltale signs, and there are more, but those are certainly the ones that stand out for me about the Oslo bombing. But you also have to consider not just the telltale signs, but also examine the motivation for a state-sponsored attack on a civilian population. And in the Oslo case, there are really several, and I think really important things to look at. So Tim Calvert indicated this. Norway supports the Palestinian state, and this is a big hot issue right now, as the UN is going to be voting very shortly on whether Palestine should be a state. Israel does not want Palestine to be a state. The United States does not want Palestine to be a state, and there's been a lot of muscle power exerted by the United States and Israel to make sure that this doesn't happen. However, Norway has always, the Oslo Accords, Norway has always supported a pro-Palestinian position. Interestingly enough, the Utoya Island, where the shootings took place, was where a pro-Palestinian political activist group was having their annual event, and this was primarily, the shooting was primarily targeted there. So now what does this mean? Well, it means that we might want to be taking a look at the Mossad implication, or CIA, MI6, yes?
Yeah, exactly what you're talking about, what you just mentioned, the Mossad, but more than that, Israel as a whole trying to get the United States into war in the Middle East, so the United States could prepare this for Israel, and then Israel could go on from there on.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I've come to think about is how tied together the intelligence operations are. How tied together is the Mossad and the CIA and MI6 and MI5, you know, what I call the Axis powers, Israel, the United States, and Britain. How tied are these military organizations together? Okay, does one really act without the other one? And you can look back at other false flag operations, the USS Liberty. There was a communication boat monitoring Egypt during this Six-Day War, I believe it was, and where Israel attacked this boat vehemently, the ship vehemently, killing X amount of U.S.
176.
Yeah, 173.
34 killed.
34, yeah.
Winning more.
So, but you know, like what happened was, of course, the military responded immediately. Johnson was on the phone calling the planes back. So it seems to me, I don't know who controls who at this particular point. I guess, you know, you might want to take a look at, does Israel control the Congress? Well, yeah, but who's controlling that? What intelligence operation is controlling that? I am like totally at this particular point, I guess freaked out, would be a really good word. that Petraeus is now, the General Petraeus, who did what he did to Iraq, that he is now the head of the CIA. This means that the head of the CIA is now in complete control of our military. Not that it really wasn't before, but now it's official.
James was the head of the CIA before he was.
There you go. So, you know, at this particular point, I don't know who does what or what does who controls what, but I think that they're so integrated right now, and they're controlled by, say, a secret government of globalists. That as you start looking up the pyramid, you start taking a look at maybe the CFR. You start taking the Council on Foreign Relations, you start taking a look at the Bilderberg Group, you start taking a look at the secret powers that seem to have, or the corporatists, the same guy that runs GE is in the White House, is in, you know, on the board of directors of the media, or owns the media, yeah.
Yeah, one little, tiny little thing. I read in the paper, heard somewhere, the Pentagon ordered so many such and such, oh, FLIR, page 7 of the Willamette Week, and I was looking through that last night. The Pentagon ordered so many of those for such and such a country, but even though they sometimes shoot at democratic groups and stuff like that, the Pentagon is for war, not for selling arms.
Right, right. But
Well, the Pentagon's a one-stop shop for aerospace defense contractor, Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing. But I think Cathie makes a couple good points. One is that international intelligence agencies, I think they are well connected in German, French, English, American. I think they do work.
And Pakistan.
Yeah, Israeli, they definitely work in coordination. Also another thing about, you take the 5,000 richest families in this country, and they have, I think, an average of about 50 board of directorships amongst them. So the same people sitting on Lockheed, Northrop is sitting on the media, CNBC, CBS are also sitting on pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer,
energy,
Merck, and General Electric, right? So they kind of coordinate the monopolies, just so, you know, one company, they decide, well, we're going to put out a vehicle that runs off of compressed air. They could have done it 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to do that. This country, if you look at every major business groupings, they're all controlled by between 3 and 5 industries controlling 80 to 90% of the market.
absolutely.
So we leave the
Richard Frager.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, stay within a time frame and get back, and we can really open up this discussion. You know, I don't know how many of you are aware that Norway supplied approximately 10%, or 6 fighter jets, participating in the U.S. NATO attacks on Libya. Just recently, just prior to the bombing, we're taking a look at what possible motivations are there for this thing. If it was a state-sponsored event, what are the possible motivations? So the first one was that they wanted to threaten Norway in its pro-Palestinian stance. The second one is that Norway wanted out of the Libya war. They were against the attack on Libya from the very beginning, and they actually started to withdraw their support of armed intervention.
You said at first it was a youth labor group, and,
Yeah.
and then was there another Palestinian rights group there? Or was
Well,
it
okay, so the
same
Labor Party is actually run by the Prime Minister, by the way. The Labor Youth Camp is led by the Prime Minister Stoltenberg. So the Labor Party is a pro-Palestinian youth organization, and the weekend that they were the shooting rampage took place, there were training sessions for the youth to participate in the boycott of Israel and to support the UN making a positive decision about a Palestinian state. So there's two really good geopolitical reasons why this attack could have taken place.
Yeah.
Webster Tarpley reports, and I'll quote, in early November 2010, the Oslo television channel, TV2, exposed the existence of an extensive network of paid assets and informants of U.S. intelligence recruited from the ranks of retired police and other officials. The ostensible goal of this program was the surveillance of Norwegians who were taking part in demonstrations and other activities critical of the United States and its policies. One of the Norwegians recruited was the former chief of the anti-terror section of the Oslo police. You know, although the goal was supposedly merely surveillance, it certainly is possible to imagine some other and far more sinister activity that could be carried out by such a network of retired cops, including the identification and subversion of rotten apples on the active duty police force. Now, what does this mean? Could the stand down have something to do with this particular scenario? Tarpley reveals the existence of what is called SIMAS, S-I-M-A-S. It stands for, I think this is really significant to me, and it stands for Security Incident Management Analysis System, which is a worldwide surveillance system used by U.S. embassies and has operational units called SDUs, or Surveillance Detection Units. Now, the interesting thing, the Norwegian government has denied,
It is interesting.
it really is, has denied knowledge of the existence of SIMAs or SDUs, although Hillary Clinton says authorities were informed. But then again, how do you know Hillary Clinton is lying? She opens her mouth. So Hillary Clinton has Hillary has no real credibility with me. But it's kind of interesting that this tension is existing now. What's really troubling to me about SIMAS is that it may be operating from a blueprint, okay, from post-World War II stay-behind groups. A really interesting book was NATO's Secret Armies. I forget the person who wrote it. NATO's Secret Armies, really interesting. It talked about Operation Gladio, these stay-behind groups like Gladio. They were secret terrorist organizations that would attack civilian areas and blame it on the communists. Now you have to understand that this was a NATO operation. This was a secret NATO operation. I believe his name is Moto. He was the Italian prime minister that was killed in some weird kind of way because he acknowledged the existence of these secret operations that operated through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now, one of the things that is feeling very familiar about the Oslo attacks and the SIMAS and the SDUs is that it's modeling the operations of these secret terrorist organizations. Maybe they were just sleeper cells. Maybe they went to sleep for a while, and these NATO secret armies are starting to become activated again. And instead of Operation Gladio, it's SIMAS and SDUs. Just a possibility, and I think we have to keep our eyes really open to that. You know, the one thing that the secret armies of NATO, the one thing that they ensured was the continuation of the Cold War. Like lots of money to the military, lots more to the military, and lots more than that to the military. Right? And I think that if you look at this, what does the Oslo or the SIMAS, what does it provide? Well, it provides a continuation of the war on terror. Cold War, war on terror, perpetual warfare. I mean, this is Orwell. So the New World Order, and I'm going to call it the New World Order, benefits from each one of these events. Like fresh on, the European Union announced plans to set up early warning systems to crack down on extremists, like before it happens, like thought crimes. Okay, yeah. So many times extremists, and we were just talking about this, are really legitimate political opposition to the EU or to American foreign policies or to Israeli policies. So typical false flag operations is the result. The result is less freedom, more controlled population, more draconian regulations, and we can see this. 9/11, the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was already written. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pages already written. So I think that I've laid out a case for that Oslo was a false flag attack, and that it operated within a blueprint. And I guess our job from here is to take that blueprint and what we know is the strings that tie this all together and question the Question, what happened on BP? I know that this was, an accident, the worst accident in the worst environmental accident in history. However, there's really signs in the BP event that suggest that the reality may not be what we think it is, yes.
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about. I haven't mentioned this much, I should to other people. What was it? I forgot what page number, but Nixon talked to the Shah of Arabia. What was it?
Shah of Iran?
Shah, the guy in Arabia, and made King of Saudi Arabia, King Fuad, and he made an agreement with him. He said, okay, if you honor our U.S. dollar, then we're going to protect you and all this good stuff. Finally, well, he went back, that was their stuff, that was part of it. But then he sent 2 or 3 jumbo jets full of silver to Switzerland and went off the silver certificate. Our money is based on oil. Now, to let that flow of oil, just get all the extra oil out so there isn't this big bunch of oil. When you have a lot of something, the price goes down. I mean, that's just a thought.
Yeah, I'm having some thoughts about this too. It's funny that BP renamed itself from British Petroleum to Beyond Petroleum. And then if you started doing minimal amount of research, and I haven't really delved that deeply into it, but I did start investigating Beyond Petroleum and found that a lot of their investments right now is in a form of algae that only grows in dead zones. Is this the new ethanol? I don't know. Let's keep a look at it. Many times you can't see it until we get further away from the event. I just want to conclude with one thing, then we'll open it up to the whole panel here. What was Fukushima? I mean, there are indications there that there was a nuclear bomb. There's one whole reactor that is completely gone. What happened there? It's just, if we can start taking the blueprint and laying it over each one of these events, maybe more will be revealed, and we can perhaps thwart future events. I want to put in the weather disasters that we're having. Some of these things are very anomalous. Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Katrina, earthquakes on the East Coast. What is that? And the earthquake that happened in D.C. was registered in Colorado. What was going on there? Were they working on their underground bases? What is happening here? And how can we start weeding out what is going on? And I suggest that we can take the blueprint and lay it over all these events. Hey. Is the food ready, or I think we have a few minutes. We can start just opening up a discussion.
Well, you mentioned Fukushima, that it might be a false flag event. I mean, to me, it's kind of a disaster that happens to nuclear power. And it's the worst thing that could possibly happen to nuclear power, which should be abolished anyway. I mean, kind of what's happening is they're downplaying the disaster.
You know what, you saw right. The whole nuclear industry should have never been allowed to develop.
Yeah.
I talked about the $20 to $25 trillion we spend on thermonuclear weapons, and still spend 1% of the budget on developing multi-generation small nukes. The public never gets to vote on this, never has gotten to vote on. And after the World War II became successful, and people say they can't keep secrets. How many people worked at the Manhattan Project? 20, 30,000. When it came time to use these things, even Truman did not know about the Manhattan Project. He had to be briefed on it. So secrets really can be kept. And I think what happened after the Manhattan Project, it turned into thousands of Manhattan projects. I think they're looking at all these physics experiments, and they go, God, look at all these things we can do.
Adams,
and what happened? It was they were trying to find uses. How can we keep this nuclear monster genie going? What can we do? They were talking about nuclear planes, nuclear automobiles. We can get fuel rods, radioactive fuel rods, take them apart, have a chain reaction, boil water, turn a turbine.
So what would be the motivation of the false flag at Fukushima?
there's war by other means going on. And these are economic wars, these are geopolitical wars, these are, and perhaps the United States and Israel, it looked like they went into Fukushima and delivered what's called MOX fuel. What was that for? There's no real reason that MOX fuel should be delivered. It suggested that at the same time the MOX fuel was delivered, that a Sussex virus was planted in the computer systems of Fukushima. Yes?
You know, like, if the people say it were a false flag, destructive thing that caused Fukushima or blew up 100%, it's kind of like shitting in your own nest if you live on Earth. You know, I mean, the people behind it, where were they at? They don't care whether they get radiated or not.
You know, here's the thing, you have to really look at America's history at Joint Chiefs of Staff level. When you talk about psychopaths and sociopaths, I mean, these guys, especially during the Kennedy administration, was all set to go into thermonuclear war. They had no problems with that. They had it all scripted out. Yeah. And I don't think you can get to that level unless you are a total psychopath, because the amount of destructive power you have. I mean, I don't know why, you know, the globe, people go around like, oh, everything's okay. You know, we have this great bourgeois culture, we can have fun and ride our bikes and just have the time of our lives and, you know, pay our bills. But there's a greater plan going on, an extremely dangerous plan. And because of not even critical thinking, but just the lack of thinking of what the reality is why they can use the same playbook over and over and over again. False flags, black ops, covert ops are not taught at any level, even the collegiate level. So it's just a playbook they can whip out and always do on constant and justify this humongous, out of control defense spending, which is tanking our economy. We are so much into debt now, and the debt is so unrealistic, it can never be paid back. I mean, ought to just cancel the debt, hell with the billion trillion bonds.
Yeah.
But see, it's all entertainment.